Now, coming to our discussion on scenario analysis, this is especially required when the amount of data is scarce, which can happen many a times for operational risk type of scenarios. Now, whenever we have such a problem whereby data is scarcity, there are a few ways in which we can make up for that shortage. So that and one important way is via scenarios. So there are different ways in which scenarios can be created. So firstly, using the data from banks' own records. Also, inputs from banks' risk committee are taken into consideration, and it can be sourced externally from other banks or even from consultants. Also, from the overall environment for operational risk, you'll observe that market and credit risk is far more active and it's very dynamic. So that way things change rapidly in those type of risks. But for operational risk environment, that is not as dynamic in nature. It's kind of static. So it does not change very frequently. As a result, we can imagine that an operational risk scenario which is posed to one bank is something similar which can be posed to other banks as well. So that way, there's a way in which standardized scenarios could be developed. So that can be done maybe by a third party or a consulting firm, and they can be tweaked a little bit as required, and that can be used across banks. Also, the tweaking of such scenarios can be done based on the management's judgment because, as we know, the operational risk will be specific for each bank, right? So that way, the active role from the management is very important so that management can then take a call what tweaks need to be done to that standard scenarios. Also, analysis performed by risk teams, risk committee, and analysis of overall risk profile of the bank. So all of these things basically give an idea of how exactly the bank perceives risk and how exactly they want these scenarios to be modified as per their requirements. But this is something which can be done, and managements do it very often so that they have ample amount of scenarios for carrying out their required operational risk testing. Now, the parameter lambda, which we had studied in one of our earlier slides. So this is the loss frequency parameter. So when you say loss frequency parameter, recollect that this basically gives an idea of the number of risk events which we or loss events that we expect over a certain time horizon. Now, this can be estimated by the bank's management, and this is associated with each scenario and also parameters of the loss severity distribution. So this becomes an important point when it comes to the overall modeling exercise as well. Now, just a quick recap on 2 points. Now, as we have seen earlier, loss frequency is based on usage of Poisson distribution. So recollect that Poisson distribution is something which we frequently use whenever we have to do any kind of event modeling. For example, when I say event modeling, you can say, let's say, event of first to default, or maybe what are the potential event of operational risk losses, etc. So that's where Poisson gets frequently used, and we saw the relevance of Poisson distribution and how exactly it lends well with the exponential kind of functions as well, which makes the modeling very elegant. And loss severity is estimated using log normal distributions. Again, there are different choices of distributions available as discussed earlier as well, but generally we'll observe that log normal distribution is something which market participants prefer as well. Now, correlation calculation is done to combine individual loss or risk types in order to arrive at a total distribution of losses. Because finally, these parameters are important as well. We need to look at the things as a whole. That's where correlations come into play. Monte Carlo simulation is extensively used. So from this, we can imagine that we need to have a good quality system infrastructure as well, because Monte Carlo simulation by itself is a very memory or a system intensive activity. So it is going to require some bit of technology support. So that way our IT infrastructure should be good enough so that scenarios can be built and they can be tested as well. Also, many a times as a part of scenario testing, there's an idea whereby we model extreme scenarios. Now, why we do this? Because we want to analyze how exactly or how robust our bank is towards scenarios whereby there is extreme stress. Now, these kind of scenarios may not actually happen as well. However, we need to understand how exactly our bank is going to behave in case this worst case scenario does happen. And for that reason, modeling extreme scenarios is something which is done as a part of scenario analysis. And that way, that also helps banks prepare better in case these scenarios have to materialize at a certain point in time. And I would say even the regulators are happy if bank does some additional scenario analysis, because there could be certain scenarios which can be readily figured out, saying that fine, these are the scenarios which we require to model. However, there can be certain extreme ones for which some additional thought will need to be applied. And when banks apply that additional thought and have that kind of a scenario, that is also seen favorably not just by the bank's management but also by the regulator. That basically says that the bank is prepared for worse things if they have to become a reality.